Mr. Horowitz, thank you so much for being guest on Marion West. We are here to talk about your last book. It's called Blitz. Without giving away too much of the book, tell us how you came about writing this book.
Chris Ruddy, who is the creator of Newsmax and Humanix Books, asked me to write a book about the coming election. And I had already written one about the 2016 election called Big Agenda. I think it's Trump's plan to save America or something. And this one is subtitled, Trump Will Smash the Left and Win. So I'm a kind of Trumpian.
No, I read Big Agenda, and I noticed under the big there is a slight pencil move in red, and Blitz also has the same design on the book.
It's all Chris. The titles are Chris. I just write the books.
Okay. Going now, coming to the book and Trump. This events happening across the United States in the last couple of weeks, especially three or 4 weeks, makes lots of people terrified. What's your take on what's happening inside the United States right now?
It's like a communist revolt. I think it's premature. The left has exposed itself for the vile, malevolent organism that it is, and when it just wants they're destroyers. It's all based on a racial hoax. There isn't now one of these cases. Is there any evidence that there was a racial dimension to it? The George Floyd case. There are 4 officers charged with murdering George Floyd. One of them's an African American. One of them's an Asian American. Where's the racial issue? This was a normal procedure. I mean, it was a horrifying video. But what made it truly horrifying is that this guy, who was a career criminal, a really bad person, he did an armed robbery of a woman who was pregnant and put a gun in her towards her room while his gangster cronies robbed her house. But he would be alive today if he wasn't overdosed on fentanyl, which depresses your lung, whatever function. And he had COVID-19, which also attacks the lungs. So this is a case just like the Eric Garner case in New York. 2 guys resisting arrest, big. It's difficult to overpower a big male if they're coming at you. Who had underlying conditions they should not be, they shouldn't be committing criminal acts. But worse than that, you don't do it if you have these health conditions. So the fact that Al Sharpton was picked to eulogize him should tell you everything you need to know about this. It's fraudulent. Al Sharpton is the number 2 biggest racist in America. He lied for years about the Tawana Brawley case, even after it was exposed as a fabrication. And you see that the left has no shame about not only inventing lies, but repeating them over and over and over again. And then everybody's intimidated because they're totalitarians and will destroy your life if you disagree with them. So people they're not going to say what I'm saying. But my book Blitz is a kind of guide to the Civil War we're engulfed in, because it shows how the Democratic Party is a racist party, how they're committed to racism. Identity politics is racism. Basically, identity politics is the Antifa code. If you disagree with me, you're either a racist, a white supremacist, or a fascist. And, we should kill you. That's basically their philosophy. My book Blitz opens with the question. Donald Trump was a public figure for 30 years, very famous. Everybody knew who Trump was. Nobody put white supremacists next to his name for those 30 years until he ran against Democrats. And the reason for this transformation, which is the big lie of the Trump years, is because the Democrats have a very dirty scandal and secret to hide, which is that they control all the inner cities of America of any size, all the killing fields, Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, St. Louis, all 100% controlled by the Democratic Party and have been for 50 to 100 years. Minneapolis, you can go on and on. All the cities involved here, Atlanta, Washington, D.C. Every injustice in the inner city, Democrats own 100% if they can be affected by policy. Rotten schools, no jobs, rampant criminality. 50% of the violent crimes in America are committed by blacks. That's the problem. Nobody wants to even talk about that. But every one of these so-called civil rights martyrs would be alive today, and if it weren't for the black rampant crime rate. If you're a police officer, you're 18 times more likely to be killed by a black criminal than a black person is to be killed by the police. Last year, there were 10 million arrests. 9 unarmed blacks were killed, 19 whites. All the statistics, which they bring out, show that there is no systemic problem of police brutality. It's very rare. And the main complaint that has a legitimacy to it is that blacks like Senator Tim Scott get stopped, they're on suspicion that they might be committing criminal acts, even if they're upstanding citizens like Tim Scott. But that's reasonable when you think, if they have somebody to blame, it's their own community for committing so many crimes. Profiling is a key to fighting crime. If a woman is raped, you don't go rounding up females, you go rounding up males. That's unjust to all the males that would never commit a rape. But, it's just an unpleasant fact of life. So anyway, here's why Trump was a threat. Well, let's remember also that Trump was a liberal. He was a guest at the Clinton wedding. He gave his contributions went to liberal causes. He's a big supporter of school choice for inner city black kids. He gave a speech in Michigan, and my book has this at the beginning. And he said, and he addressed the black community. He said, "What do you got to lose for voting for me? You got rotten schools, you got no jobs, you got rampant crime, and it's because all you elect is Democrats." Well, the Democratic Party cannot afford to lose probably 10 or 15% more of the black vote. If they lose 20% of the black vote, they can't win a national election. So what's the only possible defense? And that is that everybody who criticizes you is a racist or a white supremacist, which is what they did to Trump. But, let's remember they called George Bush a racist. They called Mitt Romney a racist. They called John McCain a racist. That's what they do. And unfortunately, they have, the real tragedy is something I wrote about. I've written 5 books about, which was the left, which wanted to burn America down, as they do again, in the 60s, did not want to fight the communists. So they stayed in college. And they basically taken over and corrupted and destroyed the greatest university system that has ever been created. It's now a one-party state. It teaches Marxist drivel. It teaches that anybody that disagrees with you is a racist. Just terrible what's happened to this country. And that was partly because Republicans are intimidated. by the left. They don't want to be called racist, so they never bring this up. The only Republican who was called the Democrat, and he called the black Democrat a racist, is Donald Trump. And this is all described in my book, Blitz. Elijah Cummings was the head of the Oversight Committee. He got into Trump jumped on him because he was humiliating, actually, Trump's acting Secretary of Homeland Security, calling him basically a racist. And Trump said, because of the kids behind chain link fences, which the Democrats like to call cages, at the border, which was an Obama policy, and the Democrats made it inevitable by not cooperating on immigration policy. And Trump just said, Baltimore, your district, is worse by far. It's a hellhole, which it is. The highest crime rates, the worst schools.
I think he called it rat infested.
And he called it rat infested, which sent Chris, what's his name? Hardball Chris Matthews.
Chris Matthews, yeah.
Yeah, he went off on a rant about it. It was a Hitlerian term. It's what they called the Jews. The greatest anti-Semitic force, the worst anti-Semitic force in the country today is the Democratic Party's coalition members. They want to tear down the statues now of Ben Gurion, of Moses. They're just Jew haters. And that's thanks in part to what I describe in my book, Blitz, as the terror caucus in the House, headed by Ilhan Omar, whose father was a propagandist for a Somali dictator, Marxist, and came into this country fraudulently and committed a series of alleged felonies, and thinks that 9/11 was a just punishment of the United States for all its sins. She's got security clearance. Of course, she hates Israel. She's always spitting out these anti-Semitic tropes.
Although judging by the statues that they're attacking, I don't think they hate Jews. They probably hate America, Western civilization, any kind of progress.
It's all in the Ayatollah Khomeini's book. They hate the great Satan and the little Satan, but they particularly hate Jews. I think they just hate Jews. They'll get around to. I mean, I don't know if there are statues of Ben Gurion in America. I just know the Code Pink has called for pulling them down. Yeah. Anyway.
Now I wanted to ask you something. The United States is one of the most free countries in the world. Economy is one of the best economies in the world, and it's all work because capitalism and meritocracy, makes this possible for everyone to, try hard, be responsible, and get themselves somewhere. What's in it in Democrats for them? Because they're American too. This kind of eradication of capitalism doesn't serve them in any way.
In terms of big countries, I'll tell you how twisted their mentality is. I point out, America had a black president for 8 years, and he was elected with a majority of white votes. We are so beyond racism in that sense. And this black woman called in and said she was outraged by what I said because Obama's not black. It's just a denial of reality. They have been overtaken by a totalitarian ideology. And it starts, the root of it is hate crimes. The hate crime is a thought crime. You kill somebody, that's the crime. You kill them because, I don't know, you don't like one-legged people or you don't like black people or whatever. That's a thought crime. Very dangerous to declare thoughts a crime. The whole idea of the First Amendment is to defend, the right of every American to embarrass themselves in public. We don't criminalize thoughts, but the Democrat Party has criminalized thoughts. Once you criminalize thought, it's so easy to say anybody who disagrees with you is committing a hate crime. And they've managed to do it. The number 3 book in America is by a moron named Abram Kendi. And this book is racism versus anti-racism versus racism. And if you're not an anti-racist, by which he means if you don't subscribe to this left-wing view of all these things, if you say that George Floyd, you don't know how, there's no evidence that the cop actually was a Democrat. There's no evidence that he was a racist. We don't know what his motive was. And we don't know, we haven't adjudicated the causes of death. But if you disagree with that, as I just have, then you're a racist. Doesn't matter who you actually are. Doesn't matter what your actual thoughts are towards black people. You're just a racist for disagreeing with them. That's totalitarianism. That's what, in Russia, it was being anti-Soviet. That's how they killed, what did they kill, 40 or 50 million people?
Well, it's still practices. It's still practice that goes on in many countries, in Middle East, in Iran, in Saudi Arabia. Turkey recently joined this action. China is doing it for many years now. This is something that goes on.
Yes, that's how they put 2 million Muslims in concentration camps, with no protests that I've seen from Ilhan Omar or all these other jihadists. No, I think that we're very on the brink of a dark ages if we don't win this election, and if we don't re-educate Americans to what their founding is about. The whole idea of the Constitution and the Declaration, because I wrote another book about this, written by Protestant Christians, was that individuals are accountable for their acts as individuals, not as members of groups. And Martin Luther King summed it up. We want a world where people are judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Well, every Democrat judges you first by your color of your skin, then by your gender, then by your sexual orientation, and then by whether you agree with them or not. It's very sinister. And that's why you have, conservatives complain about Facebook. Actually, Mark Zuckerberg does not want to be moderating the political content. But the Democrats forced him to, they want hate speech monitored. There's the problem right there. Free speech means free speech for people that hate you and that you hate. That's the whole basis of our system. That's why it's the First Amendment. So Zuckerberg.
Well, basically, you have the freedom of speech. You don't have to commit violence.
This is
you just do it by your speech.
So Zuckerberg was forced to hire 30,000 the moderators. And they're all idiot children of our university system, which indoctrinates them from day one. They purged all the conservatives from the faculties. And they indoctrinate them in the idea that if you disagree with them, you're a racist. So James O'Keefe did from Veritas, interviewed them put them on camera. And you have these people saying, well, if he wears a MAGA hat, I'll make America great again hat, then he's a terrorist. So I censor him. So we actually have as the dominant idea in our country now, unfortunately, and it's certainly in all the influential institutions, the universities, the philanthropic foundations, the media, the idea that if you disagree with the left, you're a crazy white supremacist. So Trump is just a symbol of that. And the reason they hate him is because he fights back. And my book, Blitz, shows why he's been able to prevail, even though he's the most libeled, slandered, distorted human being in the history of the world. He's been able to prevail because he fights back. I just wish Republicans would do the same.
What's your take on the left, which was originally a party of freedom of speech, now becoming party of, or the majority of censorship in speech?
It never really was. And one of the reasons that I probably deviated from the left and left it is because I read books. So in Das Kapital, he says, I'm not concerned with individual capitalists, with their merits, with who they are as human beings. Excuse me, I was sneezing. But it's the capitalists as a group. And then you just go to the Russian Revolution, and there was a head of the secret police who said, we don't care what you did in your life. We're going to eliminate you as a class. And that's the whole idea. And now it's just race classes. They want to kill white people. You know, here's a politically incorrect statement you'll find in Blitz if you go out and read it. Black slaves were enslaved by blacks, black Africans. Slavery existed in Africa for 1,000 years before a white person ever set foot there. Yet nobody talks about slavery as Africa's original sin. America was born not in 1619, as these leftists, the New York Times, Pulitzer, it's in all the classrooms now, say. But in 1776, with a revolutionary proposition that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with an inalienable right to liberty. That's America. It took 87 years. When people talk like this wretched Al Sharpton, demagogic racist, that white America is at its boot heel, on its foot, its knee, on the neck of black America. This is a monster lie for 401 years. Monster lie. America, that 401 years to 1619, America wasn't created for another 168 years to begin with. Then there was 87 years between the Declaration of Independence and the Emancipation Proclamation, which is, in those days, probably 2 generations. Why didn't they do it overnight? Well, actually, they did. The northern states freed their slaves, but the South had inherited a plantation economy from its colonial days with the British. So if the North, if in forming, like, say, the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they had included the abolition of slavery, the South would have declared war on them. The South almost won the Civil War, even though the North had 50 years or whatever. What did I say? 87 years. Well, that's 85 years to develop its economy. The economies win wars usually. So the simple truth is, and then the Civil War, more Americans died in the Civil War than in all the other wars put together. 350,000, mainly white Union soldiers, gave their lives to free the slaves, and a president gave his life, whose statue these idiots want to tear, well, not these, they're malevolent, they're evil people, want to tear down. So the correct way to phrase it is, black Africans were enslaved by other black Africans and freed by white Americans. Every black in America whose ancestors were slaves owes their freedom to white people. There were no huge slave revolts, although the communist Herbert Aptheker, wrote a little book on slave revolts. No success. The only successful slave revolt was led by Toussaint Louverture in Haiti. And Haiti is a basket case, unfortunately. But that's the only successful slave revolt. So, you know, how about the gratitude for that, let alone all of the self-abasement, kneeling, trillions of dollars in welfare payments that destroy black families. It just, it's very discouraging. But my book is very optimistic.
Yeah.
Partly because of my
That's
assessment.
a good thing about your book. At least you get some kind of a, hope that, something good is going to happen. But I wanted to ask you this.
Sure.
This wave that started, as you pointed out in, universities and academia for years, and now we see it. Do you think with a winning election, we could actually, stop it or reverse it? I don't want to exaggerate them, but at the same time, I don't think with one election we might be able to do something about these.
America, even if Trump wins, is gonna be the civil war is gonna go on for decades. I mean, the part of the problem is Republicans and conservatives. They're scared. Like I say, the only Republican who's described the Democrats as racist is Trump. Everybody else is scared. I spent 7 years in a campaign to get an academic Bill of Rights, which would guarantee students a professional education. Just you would hear two sides to controversial issues. I failed to get any significant support from Republicans. So that's the biggest problem, is the weakness of Republicans. Now, I felt like a Cassandra, a voice crying in the wilderness for about 30 years after I left the left. Because Republicans were calling them liberals. They avoid embarrassing their enemies. Nancy Pelosi, she accuses Republicans of murdering George Floyd, Cuomo and these other idiots. I mean, they're worse than idiots. They're not idiots. They're mafia. That's not a slur on Italians. Cuomo is just a mafioso. And so is his father and his stupid brother. They blame Trump for killing 100,000 coronavirus. He has no control over the healthcare system. It's run by governors. And the worst states are Democrat states. And now we have these spikes because of the protests, which nobody will say, and because they're border states. Arizona, Texas, California, they're border states. And we still have porous borders, even though Trump has done an amazing job in minimizing that. So my optimism comes, well, first of all, America is a very resilient country. And individualism is, built in through the frontier and just the way we developed as a country. I think there's going to be violence around the corner, like these leftist scum are planning a demonstration at Gettysburg on July 4th. And, there's a right wing in America that's armed, and that will take them on. And I don't know what to, I hope they don't, but you can't really blame them. If you don't have cops, what do you do? But my optimism comes because the left, I've always said, it's always been a mantra of mine, that the left never knows when to stop. They're drunk on this delusion that they're going to change the world and create a paradise. And they have this, I'm loaded on it, this incredible delusion they're going to save the planet. To me, it's unbelievable. Every year, the Mississippi River overflows. Every year, people drown. Thousands of houses are washed away. I mean, if you can't control an overflowing river, what the hell can you control? But you could say the same thing about tornadoes and hurricanes and fires. So it is such arrogance. It's the arrogance of the people who thought they were building a tower of Babel to heaven. That's the left is drunk on the delusion that they're gods, and they've overreached. I don't think Americans. I had almost no takers from my view of that the left was malevolent until Barack Obama came along, and he educated a lot of people. These guys in 2 or 3 weeks have just ripped the mask off the left. You know they're criminals. You know they were, if they had the power, they would put you in a gulag. Who could doubt that? Black Lives Matter is a violent, racist, communist organization, and they don't make any real efforts to conceal it. So I still think Americans have a lot of learning to do about them, but you know, I mean, otherwise, how could they be getting behind a senile dementia case? Joe Biden, who's a reprehensible human being, corrupt, he made his whole family millionaires by exploiting his government positions. He changes his views. Whichever way the wind is blowing, he says vile things. He's a mental case. Yet Democrats, I mean, it's a religion. That's another thing I've said. Said you know my book, The Black Book of the American Left. One of the central ideas is that the left is a crypto religion. It's very powerful. It's very emotional. It has taken the Judeo-Christian idea of a redemption and placed it in the hands of human beings. If you're an actual Jew or a Christian, you understand that the root cause of all these social problems is us. It's people. That's the. I actually wrote in my autobiography, Radical Son, that I thought that the first chapters of Genesis were the wisest commentary on our present situation. We had paradise, better than the Green New Deal. No pain in childbirth, no death, fruit falling from the trees. But the one condition was not to want to commit evil, not to want to eat of the forbidden tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And they did. And they did because they were seduced by the devil in the form of the serpent, who said, if you eat of that tree, you shall be as gods. And that's the delusion of every leftist. They can remake the world. And the higher up they are, the more dangerous they obviously. I think of Elizabeth Warren. First of all, she said we need race-conscious laws. She said on day one when I'm president, I'm going to destroy the fracking industry. So I'll just put millions of people out of work, with a stroke of the pen. That's the way the Soviet dictators were. That's the way Hitler was. And it's deeply embedded now in our culture.
Do you think the attack that they do on merely signs like statues and parts of history, is it because they want to make sure no one reads or checks history? Because all of this has been proven wrong before, over and over.
They have no idea what they're doing. The idea is to, the Cambodian communists who they killed people with eyeglasses because the bad ideas of the past. It's just a total nihilistic rejection of the past. They dress it up a little if it's a Confederate general or something, but as you know, they torn down the statues of abolitionists, people who gave their lives fighting to free slaves. the idea is to erase the past and begin, the French Revolution, they started with year 1 or 0, whatever it is. They took Notre Dame, the cathedral, and they renamed it the Temple of Reason, and they proceeded to kill the first genocide was done in the Vendée, kill every man, woman, and child if they were Catholic. So that's who the left is. It's been that way for 100 years or 200 years. I don't think there's anything new about it. And these people are totally ignorant. I unfortunately skipped a lot of my education. I'm a superficial knowledge of the Civil War, much better than any of these people. And my memory is getting a little sloggy here as I advance in age. But I know that Robert E. Lee is a complex figure, and I don't think he was especially pro-slavery. I think he just, Virginia was his homeland, as it were. And so that's why he wound up on the Confederate side. But it's all this thing about you erase the individual. Chuck Schumer had 12, all the Democrat members of the Judiciary Committee, before they held hearings on Brett Kavanaugh, who had a stellar judicial record, highly recommended even by the ABA, a liberal organization. And he said he was going to fight to the death to keep Kavanaugh off the Supreme Court without any evidence. Why? Because male, white, Christian. That's it.
And conservative.
Conservative. Yes.
I think Schumer also later on and threatened Justice Gorsuch and Kavanaugh that we will come for you. Don't think it's over something. I remember that.
Yes. You don't hold demonstrations on the steps of the Supreme Court. It's supposed to be independent of politics. Well, he did. He warned them. He threatened them like a mafioso boss. That's the Jewish mafia. Cuomo was the Italian mafia.
What's your take on, one of the great things about the United States is that, election result has been accepted. I mean, if you don't like it, but the election result is pretty much accepted. But with Donald Trump, it seems that it's not the case anymore. So I think everything after that was because he didn't want to accept the result of the election.
My book, the second chapter, describes a meeting at the Oriental Mandarin, or the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Washington, where they formed the resistance. Pelosi was there, Elizabeth Warren, Keith Ellison, the communists of Occupy Wall Street, all funded by George Soros. And the objective was to move the Democrat Party to the left, which they succeeded in doing, and to sabotage the Trump presidency. 70 Democrats boycotted the inauguration. That's unprecedented. The resistance crowd organized these massive women's march demonstrations, millions of people under the slogan, "Not my president." This was an extremely anti-American act. Normally, according to Gallup, a president gets a honeymoon period of 7 months or a year where he's allowed to appoint his cabinet and get his policies in place, and then the political conflicts resume. Trump didn't get 7 seconds. I mean, they tarred and feathered it. Jeff Sessions is a racist, where Sessions, when he was Attorney General of Alabama, prosecuted the Ku Klux Klan for murder and desegregated the schools. So I called this, and then they came up with the Russia hoax, knowing that it was lies, knowing that there was no evidence of Trump collusion, to get rid of him, to overthrow him. I say this is the worst crime against our country by American citizens since the Civil War. The Democrats are criminals. There were, I know that there are decent, well, certainly the voters, because you never know what they know or don't know. But they're intimidated. They don't speak up. Every now and then somebody says something. This guy Max Rose in New York is one. But the others, against their better judgment, they knuckle under to the Pelosi Gestapos. It's just horrible. Pelosi is the evil woman, the worst Speaker of the House we've ever had. That would include all the racists. She's a racist. It's just terrible.
Going back to accepting the election results, basically in any election, there's percentage of people who they are actually could say not my president because they didn't vote, which is fine. You didn't vote, but you don't get everything you wanted. But you put your hopes together and wait for your party or your candidate, your next candidate or so. But weaponizing not my president, it's very unprecedented and anti-American, don't you think?
It's the greatest blow you could strike at this country. The peaceful transition of power is what distinguishes us from all the European countries that have coups every few years.
Almost any country in the world. Look at China. They have a president for life now. What kind of democracy is that? And they are one of the world powers.
Yeah, the peaceful transition of power is a sacred American ritual, and the Democrats violated it. It's terrible. I agree with that.
Do you think what we are seeing recently would, keep up this way? Because if we are close to election and the stakeholders in the election, they want to make sure everything is so bad so people would, turn on the incumbent president.
Richard Nixon in the 1960 election, John F. Kennedy's father had the Chicago Mafia stuff the ballot boxes in Cook County, and it was a rigged election. And Nixon, for the good of the country, did not challenge the election. That's the way America used to be. The bad Richard Nixon was more decent than all these Democrats, more patriotic. And these people don't love their country. They hate it. I used to have to explain that and, quote manifestos that nobody read it to show it. But now you can just see it. Just turn on your television screen. They hate America. I think they made a big mistake in doing that. I think there's going to be a huge reaction. That's why I'm optimistic.
Yeah, let's analyze two possibility, and because I want to wind down too, because I'm taking much of your time now. Let's see, as the booklet says, there's an election and President Trump wins. What would happen after? And let's see the other possibility that President Trump loses the election. What happens next?
If he loses the election, I dread what's going to happen, because these people have shown who they are, and they'll open our borders. They'll make their racist views dominant. They'll criminalize. Look what they did to General Flynn to get at Trump. I mean, here's a 3-star general who was the incoming national security advisor, and they trumped up a case. They concocted a case against Flynn that they knew was false. I mean, that's treason. These are traitors. And, I wish I heard more Republicans saying that. They're enemies of this country, self-declared. They have no respect. They don't respect the most important amendment, the First Amendment. The whole idea, like I say, our system, I didn't say this, but our system is set up, or was set up by the founders to force us to compromise. The founders thought the greatest threat to a democracy is factionalism, and parties are factions, that they would organize a faction that would be a majority faction, and it would tear the country apart. It would trample on the rights of the minority. That's what the Electoral College is about. The Democrats are going to do away with the Electoral College without giving an argument that has anything to do with America. I mean, their argument, Elizabeth Warren said, we need one man, one vote. Well, the founders didn't believe that. The Senate is not, and they've already called for the abolition of the Senate. I mean, the founders were just absolutely brilliant. They put sovereignty in the hands of the people because, being Christians, they knew that human beings are flawed, and that, human beings that get power, like monarchs, will abuse it. So they put it in the hands of the people, but they didn't trust the people because the people get swept up in these past, like this Black Lives Matter crap. Not because Black lives don't matter, but because there's no war on Black people in this country. On quite the contrary. If you're a Black person in this country, you are part of a community of Blacks that's richer, more privileged, freer, and has more opportunities than any Black community in the world, including all of Black Africa and the Black West Indies. So, I don't know how I got off on that. But that's what we'll have. We're going to have that party has no respect for people who disagree with it, no regard for others, racist against whites. And they do these incredibly stupid things. Like, this isn't in my book, but it's typical of what Democrats do. In Minneapolis, okay, so they talk about abolishing the police. So, of course, these criminals are out there robbing the homeless. I don't know if the firecracker was thrown on the homeless person there or in New York. So what they've resolved, they're going to do away with homelessness. They're going to solve the problem of homelessness. How are they going to solve it? By spending $360 million on homes for the homeless. Well, the homeless aren't homeless because they don't have homes. They don't have homes because they're addicted to drugs and alcohol, and they have huge mental problems. And if you have, the only humane way to deal with the homeless is to institutionalize them. They should spend the $360 million on an institution for the homeless where you have medical professionals and, they know something about drug addiction. Well, I'm not tremendously optimistic about these drug programs, but that would be, and you take these people off the street where they're vulnerable, they can be robbed and killed at will. But Democrats like to repeat all the, not the mistakes, the atrocities that they committed in the past. So what will happen is the homeless will move into these apartment buildings and destroy them. It's really simple. That the largest housing project in Chicago, I forget the name of it, it had to be shut down because it was a New Deal project because of the violence, the crime.
Well, basically, if you didn't work for anything and they just hand it to you, you have no regard for what you've got. So
I know it's also obvious. You're absolutely right. It's completely obvious. If it's not your money, you don't particularly care where it's. And the Republicans do this too. I mean, they're paying people more unemployment than they got when they were employed. Well, what does that do? It just encourages people not to work.
Yeah, I met someone who says I'm getting paid this amount for my unemployment, but all the jobs I'm finding are less than what I'm getting, so I'd rather stay unemployed and get that money instead of working.
Yeah, and Republicans did that. They're always trying to appear nice because Democrats are always viciously attacking them. And Republicans are always too polite to do the same back. Otherwise, every Republican would open every speech they made by pointing to those inner cities and what the Democrats have done to black people in this country.
Just one quick thing. Even with the, if we assume that incumbent President Donald Trump wins, how long do you see this unrest that we see recently will go on?
I think if Trump wins re-election, he'll crack down on this. I'm looking forward to a second Trump administration. He'll do wonderful things. He already has. I think in terms of positive achievements for the most people, Donald Trump is, by all odds, the best president we've had since Abraham Lincoln. And that's, he's got rough edges and everything, but, that you should judge a president on his performance. And, there's all this nonsense. It's not Republicans or Trump that's divided the country. It's the Democrats, and they've been doing it forever.
I'm just saying thank you so much for your time. It was great of you that you gave us this time to talk to you.
Thank you for giving me a good conversation. I like that.